particularly, I think. And then another type of question that really doesn't fit well into the PICO structure is the last one that he's got on this slide, where the questions are usually answered with qualitative data. So these are usually quite open questions, and you've got a couple of different ways of dealing with qualitative questions. PICO structure doesn't really address. If you think of a setting or a context of interest, and an experience of interest, or a gap in understanding related to that context, then that can help you identify how to express your question. Oh, I see. TS. So there's a little bit of cost-benefit difference there between CT and MRI, and if CT is available more easily, then and if that's enough for a particular diagnosis, then maybe that's the origin of this question here. Sonia, what does IGRA stand for? Okay, quite possibly. Do you mean when you're talking about this question here? Okay. I'm going to move on now. I wanted to show you, this is an extract from a different book. It's the Evidence-Based Practice Workbook by Paul Glasgow and colleagues. And he's got a slightly different set of question types. And I thought it would be useful to share this with you because it's slightly different to what was in the set reading for this week, and I think very helpful. So he's got sort of disease burden type question here, which was missing, I think, before. And I don't think we saw etiology before. And then the qualitative question he's framed as phenomena or thoughts. So this is probably a fuller set of question types that you will come across when you're wanting to answer clinical questions. So, as an easy tool for making your literature searches focused along the lines of a question type, have any of you used the PubMed clinical queries before? Okay, TS has, and so has Marcellus. So TS and Marcellus, are there any tips that you would share, or concerns that you would want the others to bear in mind when they're using, or if they decide to use the PubMed clinical queries, just based on your experience? Anything you particularly like or would warn people about? So you generally just use the standard keywords, also in PubMed clinical queries search? Okay. So what I've done here is I've taken, I think it was Jan's question. Yes, Jan's question about is light therapy effective in treating seasonal depression compared with no intervention in people with no other prior history of mental illness? So I've taken what I saw as the core terms or the core factors from that question, which are light therapy, seasonal depression. I acknowledge that we want to make sure not to look at people with serious mental illness, that this is seasonal affective disorder and not something more serious. But that's difficult to separate out in a literature search just with the search terms alone. You need to sort of look for that in the search results. So what I did here was I put in light therapy and then an and then you can see I've put in parentheses seasonal depression or seasonal affective disorder. So I've got that phrase in brackets, or two phrases in brackets, and I've put them in brackets because I'm using both and or in the same search string, and we need to make sure that the ors are combined first and that the and is brought in later. So we're having light therapy and either seasonal depression or seasonal affective disorder. I hope that makes sense to you. If you've got any questions about my search syntax there, please do say. And then what I've done is just made sure that the clinical study category is based on therapy. And here's the beginning of a results set for questions on therapeutic effectiveness. And then in the middle, those of you who have identified that you want to start with systematic reviews or see if there's any evidence syntheses under your question, then the middle column here lists systematic reviews. So this could be a nice one-stop shop, as well as the TRIP database that we were talking about earlier, for finding either systematic reviews or the relevant types of primary studies. One of you said that you were trying to find it. Takira, did you find it? As if not, I can show you how to find it, if that's helpful to you. Oh, you did find it. Okay, great. Now, these question types, I'm just going to go back one screen. So this, the categories are effectively handled with recipe searches. So searches that are recipes designed or formulae designed to find reports using particular study designs. And they are not without fault. So you kind of have to be aware that this is not a perfect system. And I want to show you what's going on underneath the bonnet, so to speak. So if we look, first of all, here at this section in this table where it says therapy. Okay, so they've got two rows, and my slide, the screen grab I took there, kind of obscured something in the clinical queries options. You can choose the question category, like therapy, but you can also choose whether you have a sensitive approach to papers with this angle or a specific approach. So with a sensitive approach, as you would expect, you're more likely to get a larger number of results, and there's a chance some of them are not actually relevant. With the specific approach, you're going to get a smaller number of results, and there's a danger that you have missed some relevant results. So that's what those two options do. So with the sensitive one, what they've done is they have looked for particular keywords in title and abstract, so clinical and trial appearing in title or abstract. And then they've said it could also be clinical trials as topic, which is a subject heading in Medline, or clinical trial as a publication type, or anything that has random in the title or abstract. And do you know, can you tell me what the asterisk is doing there at the end of the word random? What is the asterisk doing there? David is saying it leaves it open. Can you be a bit more specific? Silpa said it allows variation. Yes, and so exactly, there we go. So Eurisa said wildcard terms, so this is a type of wildcard, yep, and David said different types of random. Just to be a bit more specific, what it's doing is it's taking this word random as a root, and the asterisk there is working as what's called a truncation symbol, and it's making it so that the search picks up anything that has the word random as a left-hand root, regardless of what the ending is. So it could be randomized with either a UK or a US spelling, you know, an S or a Z, or it could be randomly, for example. And it could just be random by itself. So the truncation there is a very powerful way of picking up words where you can search for the root and allow variations in the ending, just as Silpa has indicated there. That's a type of wildcard search, as Eurisa has said. It's also picked up, that random there is looking in the title and abstract, and then it's got a couple of other subject headings and qualifiers. So the therapeutic use subheading, because it's getting really technical here, that's a qualifier for subject headings. It could be assigned, for example, to a drug term that is a subject heading. So this is considered a more sensitive way of finding papers that are about therapeutic effectiveness. And you can see it really is focused on intervention studies, clinical trials, things that have random allocation in them. And it's quite similar to the next row, where you can see they're focusing on randomized controlled trial as a publication type, and a few other bits and pieces like randomized and controlled and trial in the title or abstract. So if you're interested in questions of therapeutic effectiveness, but a randomized controlled trial is not really feasible, then this filter might not work for your research. So I just wanted to indicate what was going on under the bonnet there, and to let you have some insights into the nuts and bolts. Because once you know what's going on, then you can judge whether or not this is actually useful for your particular question. So, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions then. Thinking of the approaches to literature that Greenhalgh talks about, do you do browsing? Do you do looking for specific answers? Or do you do broader surveys of the literature? Which of these approaches do you take, and for what purposes? So TS does literature searching. Okay, and Sonia is identifying, looking for something quite focused. You've got a very specific question that you're looking for. Yeah, I would say probably that's the most common. The surveying, the literature really comes in when you're doing a piece of research. Normally, I guess that normally as busy clinicians, you don't have a lot of time to do very much detailed and broad surveying of the literature. You really, I suspect, normally need to take quite a focused approach. The browsing, I put it something else in that category of the browsing. I put serendipity in there because sometimes some of the most useful papers or publications I discover because somebody mentions them to me, or I stumble across them when I'm not actually looking for it. And if you find that that happens to you, what I suggest is that you have a routine for capturing that reference so that you can find it easily or remember and come back to it later. So you might have a little notebook in your coat pocket that just you can jot it down quickly, and then when you've got a piece for 5 minutes, you can come back and have a look at it later. So develop some sort of routine. Usually what I do is I send myself an email with the tweet that somebody gave, with the link or the comment that somebody made. I send myself an email so then I can find it again later by searching my inbox. I don't particularly recommend email as a way of recording things. I think it might be a bit old-fashioned, but most of the time it works for me. Yeah, okay. So, thinking about your past experience with the browsing, the searching for focused questions, or the literature searching, the broader surveying that you do, what is your top tip that you would share with the others in the group? And what I mean is, this could be a tool or an information resource, like one of you mentioned Trip earlier, or it could be a technique. So I mentioned keeping track of things by, or remembering to take a note of something and sending myself an email so that I can, later when I have time, I can look in my email to find what I was wanting to look into later and go and read it when I've got time. So that's not, I'm not sure that that's a very good top tip, but anyway, that is one of my tips, and I'd like to hear what your tips are for one another. Oh, Eureka, I think that's a fantastic tip. So when you're doing searches, keep a journal, keep a record of what you have searched for. Eureka, do you save your searches on the platform itself? Like, in PubMed you can save your search histories, or in Medline. On these different platforms, if you create a little account for yourself, you can usually save things like your search histories so that you don't have to type them in again. Yeah. So, Eureka, do you also save it so that you get an auto alert when new records are added to the database that meet your criteria? Have you set that up? Okay. That's something else that you might find helpful. If there's something that you know that you're interested in long term, for example, something that you think you might want to do your dissertation on, then you could create a search that brings results that help you to gather literature on this area of ongoing interest. And it's a bit like having a personal press cutting service. So you can set the intervals at which you get the email alert with any new records that meet your search criteria. Yeah, Sonia, what kind of subscriptions do you? Oh yes, okay. So almost like table of contents type subscriptions. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Since you mentioned BMJ, bear in mind that the university library subscribes to lots and lots and lots of journals and also resources. For example, from BMJ, we've got BMJ Best Practice, BMJ Case Reports, BMJ Learning. And with BMJ Case Reports, our subscription allows you, while you're a member of the university, to get a fee waiver for publishing your cases. So bear in mind to make sure to look into things like that through the library if you're wanting to access and use resources like that, or to try and publish with them. Okay, any other top techniques that you would share? Any of you? Okay, I'm going to go forward then. So, this is another question looking at sort of the opposite direction. So what do you think is the most challenging part of trying to use medical information resources, whether they are literature databases or journals? What do you think is the most difficult part of using information resources? Takira has pointed out that asking the right question is a challenge. I agree. It takes practice, and the more you practice, the easier it will get. And also, it's common to need to adjust. An initial question that you come up with might not work so well, so adjust. Actually, I should be asking for you for each of the challenges that somebody has mentioned here. Does anybody else have a top tip, a suggested solution for these challenges? So, Sonia, for example, you've written availability. By that, do you mean getting into the full text? Yeah. So bear in mind that just on a logistical point, the university library, if we don't subscribe to a journal that you need electronically, check to see if we have it in print. And if we have it in print, then the library team will scan the article that you need and send it to you, or upload it for you to download. Also, that same library team, the interlibrary loans team, if we don't have an article that you need at all, they can try and get it for you from a different library. So we have reciprocal arrangements between libraries. Eureka has pointed out finding the correct words is a challenge. So does anybody have a suggested solution for Eureka's challenge there? Oh, and TS has picked up that translation can be a problem if the papers are written in languages that you don't have. So if anybody has any tips for TS on translation, that would also be great. I'm holding back on my tips because I want you to share yours, and part of the reason I want you to share yours is that I know that you already have a lot of experience and want you to pull that experience forward and recognize that you can learn a lot from one another. So support one another and learn from one another, you will benefit immensely, and know that you are already quite experienced with using the literature. Okay, so Yuri said this is your way of trying to refine the question when you've got lots of irrelevant terms. Yeah, okay, perfect. Sometimes instead of efficacy or treatment, it's helpful to think of the study designs that would yield an understanding of efficacy or treatment. Does that make sense? Because sometimes authors don't use those words, but they might describe the study design. Or the publication type. It could be that a systematic review gives you the data that you need, although they might not use that word. Okay, good. Just looking at the time, I'm going to go forward here. So, just checking to see if I missed any comments. I was going to say with TS's point about papers being in a language other than English, that's a real challenge, especially if it's very technical terminology. Because I work at a university, it's usually possible to find somebody who has the other language, because copying and pasting into something like Google Translate is not terribly reliable. And so usually at the university it's possible to find somebody who has the language, and buying them a coffee or something like that is usually enough, or offering an exchange in some way is often enough. So you might find that the languages that you need help with, other people in your workplace or in this program have the language skills that you need, and you might be able to do a bit of an exchange, a language exchange. Okay, now Tricia Greenhalgh mentions the evidence pyramid, and I wanted to ask you to consider what could be strengths and weaknesses of thinking of evidence using this approach. So I'd like this. The reason I'm asking you this is that I'd like you to start to read even guidance literature critically. So, and when I say critically, I mean to try and unpick some of the assumptions that are underlying comments or frameworks like this, the presentation of case reports, for example, being poor quality evidence, and systematic reviews being superior quality evidence. So I'm being silent because I see that there's lots of you typing, so I'm giving you a chance to put in your comments into the text chat. I'm not sure if it's just that your cursor is in the box and you're not actually typing. I'm a little bit concerned about time, so okay, it looks as though you are typing. Bear with me while I pause a little bit more. Oh, great, Ibby, thank you. Yeah, I think, Ibby, you've captured the essence of what concerns me, or the main point that I wanted to make. Although, when you say study, I think I would say the issue at hand, the issue that you're trying to address, because sometimes for some issues, the best, most suitable evidence is, for example, a cohort study. For things that are extremely rare, sometimes the best available evidence are case reports. I wouldn't thinking carefully about the issue or the question that you've got. I would not unthinkingly use an evidence pyramid like this to make a decision of what evidence you could use and dismiss other available evidence. So think carefully about what's appropriate and what is feasible and reasonable for the issue that you're trying to deal with. Sometimes a randomized controlled trial is unethical, for example, and so you need to look at another study design. Okay, but I suppose one key element is that we were talking before about you being extremely busy clinicians, and if you can find an evidence synthesis, for example, systematic review of whatever is the appropriate primary study design, not just RCTs, then that will save you time, as long as I'm assuming it's a good quality review. Yeah, just as Takira says, you need to, it depends on the quality of the underlying primary studies as well. Yep. Okay. So I wanted to ask, do any of you have database likes or dislikes? Like, do you particularly love PubMed or dislike PubMed? Love UpToDate or dislike UpToDate? Prefer Dynamed or best practice? So I'd like to know which databases you like and why. Sonia's asked, does the year of publication have any impact? I think it depends on the question. I mean, we've seen some very unfortunate studies involving trials involving human subjects, where the human subjects have had terrible complications or even died, and when they have had an examination into the premise for the trial, they found that the people designing the trial did not do a good enough literature review going back far enough in time. If they had, they would have found that these adverse effects have been previously described and could have been avoided, and the participants would not have died or suffered. So currency is a relative issue. I think currency is probably most important where there has been a significant change. And if there's been a significant change, say in treatment modalities or availability of technologies, then currency matters. Or changes in healthcare systems, for example, or infrastructure, then currency could matter more significantly. So your database dislikes and likes. Which ones do you love and why? And which ones do you hate and why? It might be that you don't use as many yet as for example, what's described in the Greenhop chapter. But if you just share a little bit about where you like to look, where you would go first, for example. I think we did touch on this earlier in the evening. PubMed Central, because of the full text, Yurisa? Yeah. So I really like BMJ Best Practice also because everything is structured in that similar way and it's really easy to navigate. Yeah. And yes, I agree. Google Scholar is a good place to start. Great place to start. And Takira's made similar comments about Medscape and UpToDate. Things can be easy to use, really beneficial. And Faith, you've made a really good point there. UpToDate and also BMJ Best Practice, hopefully the other ones as well, they give links to the references. That's incredibly valuable because then you can follow those up. And Ibby's mentioned, both, and Sonia has as well, Medscape. You're a huge fan. Partly, it's interesting that you mentioned the aesthetic. That really matters, doesn't it? Because the navigability, the usability of a site is really important. Now, I'm going to set a challenge for you all, and that is this week at least, and next week also. I would like you to go outside of your literature database comfort zone and try a database or two that you have never used before, and just explore some of the other resources that people have mentioned today that you've not tried, or that were mentioned either in the recording for this week or the readings for this week. So push yourself out of your comfort zone and try and get familiar with some other literature sources. So just a few of these could be UpToDate, which I don't think Greenhall mentioned, but actually I can't remember if she does mention it. And I would like to point you toward the Scottish Intercollegiate Guidelines Network if you've not used those before. These are clinical guidelines that are based on very extensive systematic literature reviews, and the way the recommendations are indicated with strength of related evidence is very interesting. And if you haven't tried TRIP before, I recommend that you have a look at TRIP. That's Turning Research into Practice. It's not a very auspicious name, TRIP, is it? But think of it as the TRIP database, and it's a really good one-stop shop. And if you haven't tried clinical queries before in PubMed, then have a look at that. A few of you mentioned citation tracking in Google Scholar as being a new thing that you learned this week that you found really useful. I also recommend that you set up the full text links for Google Scholar. I think that might be embedded in that slide. That link isn't actually a live. Oh no, you can get it. I think I'm going to have to, I'll upload these slides for you. I'm just going to put that link in there. Have any of you already set up Google Scholar so that it has the full text links for University of Edinburgh eJournal holdings? So that you can have easy access to all of these URLs. So, reflecting on what we've discussed so far and what we've looked at so far this week, I've got one take-home message for me, and I'd like you to think about what reflect on what your take-home message is as we go through the week. So, the main thing that I would want to bear in mind is that not all questions can be formulated in the same way, and the approach you take both to creating the searchable question the types of information that are relevant to that question, and where you go to find information about that question really depends on the question itself and its context, and also what you plan to do with the information. So have a think as we go through the rest of the week what